everybody, and welcome to today's webinar being brought to you by the Ohio Fish and Wildlife Management Association, the Ohio Bird Conservation Initiative, and the Ohio chapter of the Wildlife Society. My name is Ken Duran, and I'll be introducing your speakers today. Before I do that, I want to remind everybody that the Ohio Fish and Wildlife Presentation Series will be having webinars every other month. Our next one will be in December. Within the next week, we will have that the date officially scheduled, but you can view webinar schedules at the link provided to you on the screen. If you have any questions or ideas for future presentations, please email me your questions. Our presenters today are Melissa Moser and Ron Ollis with the Ohio Division of Wildlife. Melissa has worked with the Ohio Department of Natural Resources since graduating from the School of Natural Resources at Ohio State University in 2000. She began her career in 2000 as an ecologist for the Division of Natural Areas and Preserves, where she did extensive work with invasive species and land management. Melissa also conducts surveys for rare plants and coordinated federal rare plant activities for the Ohio Natural Heritage Program. Melissa moved to the Division of Wildlife in 2010, where she was tasked with wildlife permitting and the Ginseng program. In 2011, she initiated a statewide ginseng monitoring program. She continues to learn more about ginseng diggers, dealers, and law enforcement officials. Ron Ollis, originally from Vermilion, Ohio, also graduated from Ohio State with a BS in Natural Resources. He began his career with the Division of Recreation as a naturalist. In 1993, he moved to the Division of Wildlife as a wildlife officer. And then in 2004, he moved from a wildlife officer to law enforcement administration. He oversees many projects including ginseng permitting, turn-in a poacher, and investigations. He resides in North County with his wife Jean and their two high school-aged children. They enjoy raising livestock, participating in the county fair, and Ron is an avid trapper. Before I turn this over to them, I'd like to let everybody know that we are recording this webinar, and it will be posted after the presentation on the Ohio Bird Conservation Initiative YouTube page. The link is on the bottom of the page. And if you guys have any questions at all during the presentation, please type that into the bottom left corner of in the chat box at the bottom left corner of your screen. So with that, I'll hand it over to Ron and Melissa.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
So I'm Melissa Moser, and as he said, I work here in Division of Wildlife. Actually, I'm in the law enforcement section, although I'm a bit unique in that I'm not a commissioned officer. I'm actually a researcher in our law enforcement section, and I handle permits and also our program. So we're here today to talk about a kind of an ordinary-looking plant. It's one that doesn't really stand out. You could walk right unless you're out there looking for it. American ginseng, Panax quinquefolius. A lot of people are very surprised to find out that we actually have this plant in Ohio, let alone that it's widespread in Ohio. It's not a very common plant, yet it's pretty widespread. It's a very slow-growing native species to Ohio, and it's perennial, one that you'll find in the woodland understory, and it's been known for many years as a medicinal herb. As I'm talking here, I want to check real quick. Can everybody hear me? If you cannot hear me very well, please type in and let me know, and I'll try to talk a little louder. The term ginseng is known to the Chinese. They actually call it man root. That's what the name means. And you can see by these pictures here, it does somewhat resemble human body shape. You can see the arms and the legs, and sometimes it looks like it also on it, but the shape of the root is determined by the soil conditions and the age of the plant. if the root has to go down real deep just to reach water, you're going to end up with a kind of a carrot-looking type root. But in harder soils, more compact soils, it's going to get that body shape with those arms and legs kind of coming off of it. The species name, quinquefolius, that refers to the 5 leaves that you find on mature plants. Now, ginseng actually has compound leaves, so each leaf has up to 5 leaflets on it. And you'll see from the photo there on the right that it has 2 smaller leaves. Those are typically about 2 inches long or less, and then the other 3, they can be up to 3 to 4 inches long. These are lanceolate leaves, and they have a sawtooth edges on them, and they end in a sharp. Now there's some look-alike plants out there that have similar compound leaves, and it can be hard to distinguish. So we'll look at some pictures of that here in a minute. The picture on the left, there's actually several different ages of ginseng right there. You've got the taller 3-prong plant with a 2-prong plant and some seedlings there. And I call the leaves are actually called prongs. They can be referred to either way as leaves or prongs, but I'll show you the next slide here. You can see underneath the plant where those prongs or leaves are coming off of one main stem. And then if you look a little closer, you'll see the flowering cluster rising from the center of that whorl of leaves. Look in the background of this photo, there's several ginseng plants right there, and these are all mature plants. It would be considered mature when it has 3 prongs. And those are actually at the age when they can be dug, when they can be harvested. One thing about this plant is it is capable of self-fertilization, but it actually does better. It reproduces better when it's pollinated by other pollinators like flies and beetles, sweat bees. These are all generalist pollinators, meaning that there's nothing really specific to ginseng. It's just animals that are visiting multiple species of plants when they're gathering their pollen and nectar. Here you can see a picture of a mature plant with the ripe berries. It has some green berries on there and they turn red. This is going to happen in July and August. Larger, older plants, they can have as many as 50 berries in their Here you can see a close-up of those berries. Each berry can contain 1 to 3 seeds. Usually the younger plants have 1 seed in their berry, within the berry. And it's important to keep in mind, especially if you are trying to grow this at home, that once those seeds are in the ground, they actually don't germinate for 18, 20 months. So it does take a little patience when you're trying to grow them anyway, but in the woods, they do the same. One thing I've noticed is that the berries ripen at the same time as spicebush berries, and these plants are often found together. So, that even though it has such a bright red berry that would stand out, it's somewhat camouflaged when it's among a bunch of spicebush and you see all those other red berries. So, I don't know. They've grown together, if this is some type of way for ginseng to protect itself. There are a lot of look-alike plants, as I said before. Ginseng doesn't really stand out on the landscape. And there's a plant called dwarf ginseng. You see in the bottom right, there's a picture of dwarf ginseng. This plant also has a whorl of leaves, and it has 3 to 5 leaflets per leaf. But this is, it's actually really close to the ground. It has sessile leaves and known as ground nut. It lives in a little different habitat than our American ginseng. It likes to live in moist woods, bottomlands. Fruit on this plant is actually yellow, and it doesn't have any medicinal properties. On the left there, most people are familiar with Virginia creeper. I know when I was first trying to learn how to ID ginseng, I kept looking at Virginia creeper, and it just kept popping out of me. It's a very, very similar plant. I'll show you a picture of that. You can see it also has a compound leaf with 5 leaflets, sometimes 3 to 5 leaflets. And if you look at a ginseng leaf right next to that, you can see how it might be confusing, especially when you have a first or second year ginseng plant that only has 1 leaf with those 5 leaflets. If it's growing amongst the Virginia creeper, it stands out. Once you get used to looking for ginseng, it does start to pop out, and you'll be able to distinguish it from Virginia creeper, but I want to show you how similar those two are. This is a picture. This is actually just a clump of ginseng. Just wanted to show that after showing the Virginia creeper so you can get some idea. You can tell how it grows. It does grow differently than the Virginia creeper, although the creeper can grow kind of as a small shrub. It also grows as a vine and ground cover, so the ginseng blends in pretty well with it. Of course, the ginseng has very distinctive roots. You can see the root here. If you look close, it has some horizontal rings on it. These are stressed rings. They're actually desirable. They make the roots more valuable. The more rings they have, the darker the color. If it has like that bulby main trunk on the root and the long neck on the top there, that's going to help show the age of the plant. And all of those help to increase the value of that root. You can see all those little nodules, all the things coming off of that main root. You know, those are all extending out there trying to find water, and a good digger is going to pull that root out of the ground and have all of that intact. So I mentioned already that it is a slow-growing perennial species. It does prefer mature hardwoods. It likes to have well-drained soils, very rich soils. This plant can be very long-lived, 20 to 75 years. That seems to be kind of a average, I guess, although there was a plant that was found in New York in the Catskill Mountains that they estimated it to be about 132 years old. So as it grows, the older the plant, the more leaves or prongs that you'll have. So first-year plants, they just have the 1 leaf, and then as it grows, it'll grow more leaves on it. I've seen a 5-prong plant, but I've heard that it could grow 6 prongs, but that would be very rare. Of course, it's exported to Asia because it's prized for all its medicinal properties. See the life cycle, there's that first plant, kind of looks like a wild strawberry. Blends in pretty well. Unfortunately, I think the other slide might be cut off there just a little bit, but the other picture, you can see it grows 2 leaves. Sometimes those 2 leaves will only have 3 leaflets that first year that it comes up as a 2-prong, but then maybe the second year it'll grow up to 5 leaflets. And then it continues to grow. It'll go up to 3 leaves, and then 4 leaves. And then that big cluster of red berries there, that's obviously from a mature plant. I'd say that's a very old plant since it has a tight, large cluster of berries. And then the seeds. Again, it takes 18 to 20 months for those seeds to actually grow into a plant. And from the work I've done out in the field, I've noticed that those first-year plants, those little seedlings, they don't often list all season long. They might pop up in the spring and then disappear by summer. But that doesn't necessarily mean the plant's gone. It's just gone for the year. So ginseng habitat is pretty variable. I mean, in general, it likes mixed mesophytic forests, rich soils. There's a lot of plants associated with the species. Things like, as I said, rattlesnake fern, that's one of those plants that's known as a ginseng pointer. Often if you find rattlesnake fern, you're going to find ginseng. There's also plants like white baneberry, golden seal, black cohosh, bloodroot, trilliums, blue cohosh. And then with trees, you might see sugar maples, tulips, beech, quite a wide variety of plants. And I've seen it, in areas like this where there's just really a lot of ground cover. The plants blend in. Sometimes they're hiding underneath things like the cohosh or the spice bush. You have to really look for them. But so, I'll find it in bare situations too. And here you can see pawpaw. That's another plant that it likes to grow with. As a matter of fact, there's probably about 60 plants right on the other side of this pawpaw sapling right there in the photo. Populations are usually pretty small, with less than 200 plants at one particular site. It's a very widely distributed plant. Basically, it's somewhat limited in the south just because it needs to have those cold winters to stimulate the seeds and break dormancy. And it's limited in the west by the lack of shade and water. But of course, it could be cultivated in any of those places if you want to, if you give it the right conditions. And some of the largest suppliers of wild ginseng are right in our nearby states: West Virginia, Kentucky, Tennessee, and Indiana. Kentucky itself has about a $5 million annual ginseng industry, so a lot of roots coming out of these states. The genus name, Panax, that means it's a cure-all, basically. So in the Asian market, they use it to treat any number of ailments or just as a general well-being. It's something that you take just to keep yourself feeling good. And here in the U.S., you can find a wide variety of products that have ginseng in them, from shampoos and lotions to vitamins, drinks. There's all kinds of teas that have ginseng added to it, and there's a long history of use of ginseng, but and the value of it's always been very high, but there's not really that much scientific evidence proving all these benefits. There have been some recent studies that have shown that it does have some anti-diabetic effects in mice. And also, there's a pretty consistent, dramatically effective sexual stimulation caused by the ginseng plant. So that's been known in male rodents. So of course, people like to take it thinking that it does the same thing. It also is known to stimulate the immune system and inhibits the growth of human cancer cells. And in some cases, it's thought to actually kill existing cells. Like coffee, it's a stimulant. This is a little bit hard to read, but there's a lot of different benefits to ginseng, and things like helping your mind to be clear, and if you have, as I said, it has the anti-diabetic properties, so it helps you with controlling your sugar, and the root of life, so they say. I'll turn it over to Ron here for a few minutes, let him do a little talking.
Morning, everyone. Let us shift here real quick, and hopefully you can all hear me. We can't talk ginseng in Ohio and ODNR's role in ginseng without talking about CITES. CITES is the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species of Wild Fauna and Flora. CITES is an international agreement between governments to ensure that the international trade in all kinds of critters, and not just plants, to make sure that it doesn't threaten their survival. There's 179 nations that are member parties, and when ginseng started many years ago, 1973, there were originally 80 parties to the convention. In the U.S., the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service is the authority, and within Fish and Wildlife Service, it's the Division of Management Authority is who we deal with when sending reports up and asking questions on ginseng management. There are 3 appendices to CITES. Tier 1 species, or Appendix 1, are species such as rhinos, elephants, things that are gravely endangered and on the verge of extinction. Appendix 2 are lookalikes and species that are highly commercialized and things that they want to track. And then Appendix 3s are ones that are kind of the watch list. They're watching those critters, and this is a very basic kind of synopsis of the 3 appendices. But ginseng falls into Appendix 2. Appendix 2 are those species, like I mentioned, that may become threatened with extinction unless their trade is subject to some form of regulation. And whether that's coming into a country or leaving a country, there are plenty of regulations, and you'll kind of catch on to that here as we go. Commercial trade is permitted, and it is done under extremely controlled circumstances. There are export certificates required to make sure that any ginseng leaving, in our case the state, and then eventually the country to the Orient, make sure that it was legally harvested. And when it comes to moving things around, there's been lots of discussion on other species, either moving from one appendix to another. It takes a multilateral agreement, so they have to have majority of the member nations have to agree that the species can be moved, and that can be very difficult at times. There's a lot of influence on that group that manages CITES. Ginseng, it's included in any form, whether it's the whole root, the whole plant, sliced up, ground up. All parts of ginseng are regulated under CITES, and they were added. Ginseng was added in 1975 to Appendix 2. Anything that's already been manufactured, so basically if there's a manufacturer in Ohio that makes a drink of some kind, like Melissa explained a couple minutes ago, if someone's making those, once it's into that product, it can be entered in the commerce, and there are no considerations under CITES. But as long as it's the raw product, it does fall under CITES. Originally, back in 75 and until 1999, the Division of Natural Areas Preserves did all of the ginseng management and certification process and oversaw law enforcement. I wanted to throw out there, otters. We do have other CITES species in Ohio. 2 of them that come to mind are bobcats and river otters. And for many folks, it's easy to pick up on those 2. We do have an otter season, and when an otter is harvested, as it says in the law and as many people get to deal with, those otters have to be inspected. They have to be brought in for a visual inspection, and they are given a CITES tag, and it must have that CITES tag in order to be exported from the state or sold into the fur trade. Ginseng management here in the U.S. Is governed under 50 CFR of basically the rules under the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and those titled International Trade in Certain Species. That is a very large section of law to try and digest. Harvest, though, is managed at the state level. So basically, the Fish and Wildlife Service oversees the export, the trade, kind of helps determine what's going on with the species, but the states actually manage this within themselves. The states have to certify all wild ginseng, and whether it was cultivated or if it's from the wild, verify that it was legally acquired. And that is the certification process that Melissa is going to talk about here in a couple minutes. It's basically a commodity that gets regulated. Every year, this is part of Melissa will talk about here in a bit, the states have to provide a report with all of our harvest data and what left the state of Ohio and was entered into commerce. CITES permits, there's an export permit that's needed, so if a dealer happens to buy a bunch of ginseng and they want to send that to China for sale there, they have to get their permits from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service branch of permits. Once they get that permit, they have 6 months to get that ginseng out of the country. And once they get it to the port, there are considerations at the port under the U.S. Department of Agriculture. That is most likely who's going to inspect that and look at the barrels and verify that it's legally acquired and can leave. And before it can leave, all of the original state certificates, they have to be together. They have to get all that paperwork together and have that, the originals, to get it out of the country. One thing that comes up every once in a while that we get to hear about, and we get phone calls from USDA, are verifying, lots of ginseng are legal. And sometimes you'll have they'll have a large lot of ginseng they're trying to move, and they'll mix years, 2010 ginseng with 2011 ginseng, and they cannot do that. Harvest years must be kept separate, so they'd have to get 2 different export permits to get that ginseng out of the country if they had that route. CITES guidelines. Basically, the whole purpose of CITES, again, is to make sure that export of the species is not detrimental to its survival within the U.S. or within the state of Ohio, and to make sure that export is limited in order to maintain that species on its range. Part of the thing that we do is to come down to this next slide, that is determining non-detriment. That's the one thing that we have to show to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service on an annual basis, is that collection of ginseng in Ohio and export out of the state and eventually out of the country is not serving as a detriment to the survival of the plant in the state of Ohio. There are several factors that they use for that. In order to meet that guideline, they rely on knowing the origin and the amounts of ginseng, both cultivated and wild, that's leaving the country. They rely on the viable research that's going on, such as Melissa is doing, that she'll talk about here in a little bit, and Dr. McGraw at West Virginia, and many other researchers throughout the Midwest. And also they rely on input from the state agencies. We do kind of track harvest trends and what's going on with our ginseng populations, kind of comparing that to market price and what we should expect to see on a regular basis. In order for the state to be able to export wild ginseng, and this is a pretty important part, the state must have a ginseng management program. The ginseng management program is kind of what comprises of our enforcement, our certification, our management. All of those pieces fall into ginseng management, and it's required under 50 CFR Part 23 of the U.S. Wildlife Service Code. And without a ginseng management program, any ginseng harvested in Ohio could not leave the state legally. 28 states ginseng management programs.
Okay, so as part of our program, we do have to keep track of the harvest and certification data. So every person that is having ginseng certified, they're going to come certification, come with all their paperwork, all their records that go with that lot of ginseng. If they have 50 pounds of ginseng they want to have certified, there's going to be paperwork showing where all that 50 pounds of ginseng came from. We're going to keep track of the digger names and their address, what county the ginseng was collected in, how much was collected at each time, and the dates that those did. All this is actually going to be entered into a database, a rather large database now, and then that's going to be summarized and submitted to U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service each spring. Also, as part of our ginseng program, we need to be able to provide training to both our in-house staff and to others. We get lots of questions about ginseng and the laws. And we also are, promoting ginseng management. There's a lot of information out there on, how best to do that. We also issue dealer permits. So just to clarify, you don't actually need a permit to dig ginseng. You just have to have landowner permission to do that. And you would want to get that in writing. But if you are going to buy ginseng, you need to have a dealer permit. So we handle that here out of our central office. We probably only have about 70 or 80 of those ginseng dealers in the state right now, and we listed that on our website. So if you are a digger and you wanted to find a buyer for your ginseng, you can get on our website, take a look at that list, and perhaps call around and it's going to give you the best rate for your ginseng. So we also maintain the certification program, and we have to provide locations for people to get their ginseng certified, and the protocol for that location, so everybody's doing it the same way, and we're making sure that we're doing it in the way that we need to, so this ginseng can be exported without any trouble. Another that we've recently added is the monitoring of wild populations. So in 2011, I started a statewide monitoring project. You can see my sites are scattered, scattered throughout the site, from Fulton County to Scioto County and all the way over to Belmont County and Miami County and west. And this is, it's just interesting to see that we do have ginseng in all these various places. A lot of people are surprised that we have it in Fulton County. There's not that many areas for it to grow up there in northwest Ohio, but there are plenty of small woodlots and places where it can live. So what I'm doing is monitoring wild populations of ginseng, and this is going to be summaries are given to Fish and Wildlife Service, and they're going to use this information in addition to our harvest and certification records to determine whether the harvest in Ohio is actually sustainable. Some of the threats I'm looking for doing in my monitoring project are invasive plants. How are they affecting our ginseng plants? How are deer affecting them? That deer seem to really like to eat ginseng. And poaching, of course, that's something I'm watching out for. The sites that I have are in a variety of ownership. Some of them are actually protected on the private level, like some conservation organizations, also just private landowners, and then state properties mixed in there. So I have a variety. Some of the information that I'm gathering from these plants, I'm looking at some basic things as far as how tall they are, how many leaves they have, how they're reproducing, how well they're reproducing. You can see I do actually mark individual plants. I've started using, they're actually aluminum nails. I engrave numbers on the end of them, so trying to be somewhat conspicuous so that the plants aren't, it's not really obvious while I'm out there. I don't want people getting my plants, don't want them to stand out, but I do need to be able to tag them in some way. So in 2012, it was actually, the number of plants that were harvested was down, but if you remember, it was a pretty dry year. It had drought conditions in many counties of the state, but we still had over 2,600 pounds of ginseng harvested. Perry County had the largest harvest with over 150 pounds. That's 150 pounds dry weight. And just as a side note, when ginseng is harvested, the weight of the root is a lot heavier. If you think about all the water, the moisture inside that root, so it usually dries at a rate of 3 to 1. So 3 pounds of ginseng, green ginseng, is going to dry to about 1 pound of dry root. So the average number of roots per pound last year was about 320. And so we actually certified 2,676 pounds of ginseng. You notice there's a little bit of a difference from what was reported harvested to what we actually certified. And that can be accounted for, that difference can be accounted for by just that drying rate. It doesn't always dry a consistent rate, so there's a little bit of discrepancy there just because of that. So I did want to put together just a little list of our more recent historical harvest data. You can see the numbers pretty much stay the same. We had her in 2009 with over 5,000 roots harvested. The number of roots per pound, that's usually around 300. This gives a little bit gives you a better idea of how the harvest data is changing from year to year. You can see in 1992 we had over 12,000 pounds of ginseng harvested in Ohio. If you think about that, at 300 roots per pound, that's over 3.6 million plants. And I read recently that back in the 1800s, when we were harvesting a lot of ginseng every year from America, in 1841, which they call it a typical year, at least 64 million roots were shipped to Asia from America. So we've had a lot of years of high harvest. Luckily, we don't harvest quite that much now. So you can see that the roots per pound, that pretty much stays the same. That means that the size of the plants is consistent. This information, as well as the harvest information being relatively stable, that means that we're doing an okay job managing the ginseng in the state, that our current harvest levels are okay, and we can continue with that non-detriment finding. That's what Fish and Wildlife Service is going to see from that mission.
Back. Now for the really exciting part, kind of the law enforcement piece. Jurisdiction and authority the Division of Wildlife has over ginseng is found in revised code, and that came to in 1999, and you can find it in revised code section 1533.86 through 1533.90, and there's a lot of information there, and I will try to keep everybody awake as much as I can. I will go through some of those sections and talk about them. But in Ohio, the wildlife officers can enforce ginseng regulations throughout the state, both public and private property, and any peace officer can enforce ginseng regulations within their jurisdiction. So in short, all I'm trying to say there is, obviously the Division of Wildlife and the wildlife officers are busy with complaints on illegal harvest, taking ginseng from private property, harvesting ginseng during the close season, and they're working those complaints, both public and private, throughout the state. But also a state trooper driving down the highway on a traffic stop could very easily see ginseng on the back deck of the car, drying in the window, and easily make a case there and handle that case themselves without having to contact us. So kind of an important part. We do need to move. You're right. The one question we get a lot: wild versus artificially propagated or cultivated. Wild ginseng is grown in its natural state. It's not, it's in the woods, naturally occurring. And artificially propagated ginseng is grown in tilled beds under natural shade. I got a picture here we can show you. Here's some good examples of cultivated ginseng. It's grown under normal horticultural practices, and you look at states like Wisconsin; they are big cultivated ginseng states. And then Canada does not allow the export of wild ginseng, but they do have a large cultivated ginseng industry. Next picture here. This is a Knox County picture, I believe, from quite a few years ago. These large roots, carrot-looking, those are cultivated ginseng roots. But if you look at the back of that picture, kind of the top right, you can see a little bit different color, a lot smaller roots, a little more wrinkling to it. A good chance that was some wild ginseng that had been collected. As far as enforcement, Revised Code 1533.87 is the section that gives the chief the power and the authority to do all things necessary to regulate the harvest of wild ginseng and its possession, transportation, both of wild and cultivated root. And if anything gives us any grief, it is cultivated root. The market is for wild ginseng, but there are many people, as with any other commodity, trying to make a buck. And cultivated ginseng does come into play. If we're lucky, with just a few pounds that we certify every year, because the market dictates for wild ginseng. Wild ginseng currently, and I think I have this a little bit later, is roughly about $700 a pound as of a week ago, whereas cultivated ginseng is more in the $26 to $35 range, if that, depending on the root. 1533.88 kind of tells what he is supposed to do, and obviously, as you can see here, the chief has to establish a harvest season, establish the certification program, the buying season, create the permit, which is a dealer permit for folks who are going to buy, and materials and all the forms that we use to track ginseng. 1533.81 is the section that gives the chief the authority to require a permit. So anyone who's going to buy ginseng or take ginseng in and resale it has to have a registration or what we call a dealer permit. And the chief can deny anybody's permit if they have violated ginseng rules in the past. There are many prohibitions, collecting during the closed season, collecting without permission of the landowner, exporting uncertified ginseng, taking it out of the state. That's all that takes. Failure to keep records, keeping ginseng of another person without records, providing false information, and all of these violations are first-degree misdemeanors. Now, as far as export, if they export it out of the country, that can take it to the federal level. That is just as with any wildlife species, makes that a Lacey Act violation, and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service can step in. If you notice, a couple of very similar to federal rules on migratory birds, as far as record keeping and things like that. Again, as I already mentioned once before, any enforcement officer can enforce ginseng within the limits of their jurisdiction. City police officer, state trooper, state park officer, as long as they're within their jurisdiction, they have the power to enforce ginseng regulations. Forfeiture of illegal ginseng, we do get this question a lot. So far this year, and I'll touch on this towards the end, we have seized close to 60 pounds of illegal ginseng. That ginseng is typically forfeited, and hopefully the ginseng we're talking about here will be forfeited to the agency. And we typically hold on to that, and if it's suitable for sale, it's not moldy, it was taken care of properly, we will send out letters to all of our dealers if they'd like to come in, view the ginseng, and offer a bid to buy that ginseng. Of course, we have to follow evidence rules and court orders to be able to do that. Certification process. Melissa, take over here a second.
Okay, so everybody that wants to take ginseng out of the state has to have it certified first. Most often it's our ginseng dealers who are doing that, although we can certify ginseng directly from the digger. So to bring in their ginseng and have it weighed, we're checking their paperwork, make sure they have harvest records for all of that ginseng that they brought in. We're going to check all that, and we actually have certified scales that we use, and we're going to stamp that ginseng certificate and sign it. They'll, of course, that ginseng shipment. Here's some photos just to show you kind of what we expect. Sometimes, or quite often actually, people bring their ginseng in barrels, but we ask that we like the plastic bags because we can actually see that there's ginseng all throughout there. It makes it a lot easier for us, but you can see how that's just weighed on the scale there. We also have to pull out about a pound of ginseng from each of those certificates, or each of the lots of ginseng, and we're going to count out how many roots are in 1 pound. That's going to help us with our average information that we need to turn into Fish and Wildlife Service.
Back to me. As an enforcement agency, we obviously have priorities and what we're looking for in the direction we want our officers really looking at when it comes to law enforcement. One of our biggest complaints as far as ginseng goes is harvesting without landowner permission. So that is the number one priority, addressing those complaints, working those properties that have had complaints in the past, following our incident reports, and working those cases, working with landowners. There are many landowners, in 10 years of doing this and going to many meetings, I've met a lot of of folks that when their children were born, they ginseng, or they've managed a plot of ginseng on family property for decades. Their grandfather did it, their dad, they're doing it. Not, great things, neat things. Can be a lot of money involved, yet someone comes in and pilfers their crop in one night, and they've lost literally tens of thousands of dollars. And in fact, we had a homicide just a year ago in Preble County, and that was due to a ginseng theft. An owner took actions into his own hands when someone was stealing his ginseng. Another harvesting or enforcement priority is closed season harvest. We do have a September 1st season. We can only harvest from September 1 to December 31. We have Jennifer Windus in our own ranks here to thank for that. A few years ago, Jennifer did some work on ginseng and discovered that was the best date. That's when most of the berries had already ripened by that point, and that was the best time to harvest. The majority of the states, the 28 states that have a ginseng management program, are using September 1st as their date. Kind of makes it uniform between the states, keeps people from claiming. Kentucky had an August 15th up till just a few years ago start date. Keeps people from claiming it's Kentucky root and playing a shell game. And it's $700 a pound, and just a few years ago, 2006, 2007, at $1,000 a pound. There's lots of reason and opportunity to cheat. So we want to make sure we're as universal as we can. There we go. Harvesting only mature plants with ripe berries. Plants have to be three-pronged or larger in order to be collected. And I believe Melissa hit on this earlier. A large plant or an older plant might be a 5-prong, 4 prongs. That's the number of leaves that are on the plant. It has to be a 3-prong or larger in order to be collected. And if it has berries on it, those berries have to be ripe. They have to be red. Any berries that are collected, they have to be immediately replanted at the location the plant was dug, provided that they're present. And for us, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service actually has a 5-year rule. But I'll just explain it here real quick. Typically, and through research, they have found that a 3-pronged plant is 5 to 7 years old before it reaches that stage. They grow up as just a single little prong, and as they get older, they add a prong. And so 3 prongs, 5 to 7 years old, but they can jump around. You might have a 5-prong plant this year, go back next year, and it'll be a 3-prong plant. And I'm sure Melissa's seeing some of that. When it comes to aging plants, you can do that by the annual aerial stem. There are bud scars. That root that you see on the left, so when you have a root in hand, you have the actual root, and then there's this piece that comes off of it, the rhizome. And you can look at that rhizome, you can count all those bud scars, and you'll know how old the plant. The plant on the left, if I remember right, is 10 years old. The plant on the right is 5 years old. And that's what many of the USDA inspectors are using when they're inspecting plants at export. They'll pull out a random number of plants, and they're looking at those roots, provided they have rhizomes on them, and trying to determine the age in order to get it exported. Harvest is prohibited on all ODNR-owned properties, so that is another enforcement priority for our officers. And then on the Wayne National Forest, there's only 2 national forests that allow harvest. One of them is the Wayne National Forest, and it can change at any time. They do allow limited harvest. I believe it's 1 pound for a $25 permit. Record keeping, all diggers must keep and maintain records, as must any dealer who is buying ginseng. It is records that help us track, help us make determinations biologically, help the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service keep that non-detrimental finding so that we can export ginseng. So records are an important and viable piece to this puzzle, and we have to have rules in place to make sure that happens. Anytime you transfer ginseng, the person has to give up their information, basically, their name, their address, the ginseng, where they harvested, the amount, etc. Purchasing ginseng, you have to have a dealer permit, registration permit, as it calls it in the law. All dealers have to maintain records. They use forms that we provide them to do that. The season for purchasing is September 1st through March 31st, but they cannot purchase anything but green ginseng from September 1st to September 15th. And that's to keep folks who harvest early from just stepping in on September 1st and getting top dollar for their root. And again, only certified ginseng that has been, come in, been seen, and certified by one of our employees. It's the only route that can be entered into commerce after April 1st until August 30th. Law enforcement cases. Here's a couple mugs of a few of the guys. All these cases here in front of you, except for the bottom left, are recent cases. This year we did have an early buying case, and a search warrant was executed just a couple days before the season, and they seized approximately 34 pounds of ginseng, and that's what you see there in the top left photo. The photo on the right is Eric Bear, and I believe that case was made on the Wayne National Forest, someone who was digging pre-season, about a week or so before season. And then just a picture there on the left, probably a typical scene in August and September here in Ohio of an enforcement case going down, whether it was a state property case, harvesting without permission, just making contacts with folks and doing good checks in the field. So, good number of squirrel hunters, folks like that are also good checks in the field, the enforcement officers. Law enforcement cases. I do have a typo there. There are actually 30 cases in fiscal year 2012 for ginseng-related violations. The majority of those were for pre-season harvest and harvesting without permission. The pricing this year, like I said, upwards of $700 a pound, and might even be better for quality root. So we are certainly seeing a little uptake this year. There was a lot of pre-season harvesting, primarily down in District 4, our ginseng stronghold, and they've been very busy down there this fall working on ginseng cases. Just as an unrelated note, or a related note, Ohio is known for its enforcement efforts on ginseng. We have many states contact us. What are we doing? What are your officers' techniques? Things like that from some of the other states that are having problems. Just spoke to Michigan yesterday about some of their ginseng issues that they're having. And ginseng is a zero export state. They only allow cultivated ginseng to be exported because they found that the harvest had a detriment on their population. So there is no harvest from ginseng.
Michigan.
In Michigan, yes, in Michigan. There you go, good point. Went a couple minutes too long, but...
We wanted to give you guys a costume idea for next Halloween, so in case you're looking for something, you guys could be a ginseng. But thank you all for listening.
Thank you, Melissa and Ron, and I assume, Melissa, that you're wearing that costume currently. We do have about 7 minutes if people have questions for you guys. Go ahead and just type them onto the screen.
There was a comment posted there about the harvesting on the Wayne, that it's a half-pound fresh, that's what that permit is good for, or a total of 95 plants or 95 roots. And that is not just ginseng. That could be folks that are collecting yellow root, folks that are collecting cohosh, bloodroot. There are many. Ginseng is not the only root that is harvested in the state of Ohio. There are other plants that are harvested. However, they are not a CITES listed plant, at least not at this time. I know that there's been discussion on root, but at this point, fortunately for us, it has not been added.
Well, I have a question for you guys. When you're certifying the ginseng, do you have to look at every root?
No, we don't look at every root. But, if they're bringing in a 50 or 75-pound barrel of root, we could dump that whole barrel and look through and make sure that it is indeed all ginseng throughout. We don't want somebody weighing it down with rocks or who knows what just to try to be deceitful there. But We don't actually handle every root. I mean, I've done a few certifications recently where I've certified, 453 pounds in one situation and another 303 pounds, and think about 300 roots per pound. That's really a lot of roots. And I can tell you that the price, the last certification I did, they were paying about $7.25, and he talked about he paid up to about another $8.25 for some specific roots. So the price does fluctuate, and it really depends on the quality of the roots and the timing of it as well.
It looks like Tanner has a question about publicizing poaching.
Yeah, that is a good question, and we do our best to advertise these cases. We do try to talk about them. There are court jurisdictions. Every court is a little bit different. We have some court jurisdictions that absolutely hammer ginseng poachers and see it for what it is, see it as a theft from a landowner or what it's doing to that population of ginseng. But yeah, we have other counties that just don't understand it and don't see that issue, and that makes it difficult for us. But there is a good deal of publicity that goes on with this, especially these cases where we're seizing large numbers of root. And we definitely need to probably do a better job of getting that information out there. But obviously through Wild Ohio, through the Ohio Outdoor News, our other media outlets, we do our best to get articles out there. It doesn't mean they're always going to get printed. But a year like this year and a year like 2007-8, where it's very, very advantageous to cheat, the chances of getting caught are pretty slim. There are landowners that put elaborate security systems up to monitor their ginseng, but the majority of folks are not doing that. So money dictates a lot what's going to happen. We have other years where 10 or 12 cases, but ginseng's only going for about $200 a pound that year. So it fluctuates greatly.
And 2013 is a very good harvest year. It's been a great growing year for ginseng. So we've got a lot of it being certified right now. A lot of it being dug.
Had good moisture through the summer, carried the plant. It's where a lot of ginseng dries down. It's hard to find come September 1st. This year, that's not the case. There's still a lot of ginseng up, and you were able to find it after September 1st. We have a question from Laura about restitution value placed on plants. That's kind of up in the air, but what the courts have been doing for us here in recent times is the current market value. So we've been able to go in, talk to the court, work with the prosecutors, and demonstrate what the current market is, talk to some of our larger dealers, and use that value that they're buying as a restitution value. Oftentimes on private property, we've seen it kind of all over the board. We've had it where ginseng is forfeited to the agency. We've had it where the ginseng itself is given to the landowner, stolen for them to sell, and we have seen it where we've had to basically facilitate the sale and get the money to the landowner. So all over the board when it comes on the private side. It just all depends on the court and the prosecutor's office and how they adjudicate the case.
Why is cultivated ginseng so much less desirable than wild ginseng? That's a great question. I mean, it obviously looks different. And the Chinese market, they're the ones setting the value for these roots. And I don't know. Do you know, Russ?
They look at ginseng. They want wild ginseng. There's the tannins, the minerals. Ginseng grown in Kentucky is highly valued. Soil type in Kentucky, the root is very red. It takes on that red appearance just like their soil. Ginseng from certain southwest Ohio counties is valued at that same value. You might have a plant that could be 25 years old and it's only the size of your pinky compared to another plant grown in the wild in a different part of the state that's twice the size of your thumb and is only a couple of 7-8 years old. And that long, slow-growing, those older plants that are really desirable. And a lot of it has to do with the minerals, the tannins, the properties that are in that root. And scientifically, there are differences between cultivated and wild ginseng. Cultivated ginseng is grown in a garden, fertilized, those types of things. It's just not nearly as desirable as the wild root. And why do they rhinoceros horn? Why do they, do all kinds of things? Why is ivory so desirable when there's all kinds of synthetics? Because the real McCoy is what people want. That is, market is driving. Good question there, Debbie.
All right, well, I think that's all we have time for today. Thank you again for your presentation. It was great. Really appreciated it. And thank you, everyone, for who logged in and listened to it.
Thank you, everyone.
Yep, thank you.